Hey everybody, Coldor here. Today we are looking at the Spirit Kings, normal difficulty, in Mogu'shan Vaults. So this fight is pretty cool. You face off against the four various Spirit Kings, and you'll fight them each one at a time. They are quite different from each other, and they all have a variety of abilities. But the cool thing is that as you fight each one in a random order, it adds one of its abilities to the remainder of the fight. So depending on the order that you get them, it can change how things go. So I'll go ahead and just split this video up pretty simply into sections for each boss, and then we'll go through the whole thing in its entirety and just talk about how we're handling the fight. Alright, so to start off, we're facing Chang the Merciless first, and he's sort of the warrior type Spirit King. The first thing you need to know, and most important, is that when you engage him, everyone needs to immediately stack up on the tank in front of the boss. This is because very frequently when he does his melee attack, he uses a special called massive attacks. This is basically a sort of cleave attack in front of him that does over 1 million damage, but it splits that damage among all players in front. So you've seen this sort of mechanic before. You just have to make sure that everyone is stacked up. You can do it with fewer people than the entire raid, but because you have to move at various times, it's better to be safe and have an overabundance of players rather than too few. So that said, the next ability you have to watch for is Annihilate, which he's about to cast here in a moment. There it is there. And that is a very large strike with a cast time. And anyone that remains in it takes 1.5 million damage, so they die. So, because of the combination of Annihilate plus the massive attack cleave that everyone has to help soak, it's important that you have a designated plan about where you're going to move when you have to move away from things like Annihilate. So in our case, we always rotate to the left or clockwise when Annihilate is cast, and that way the follow-up massive attack on the tank is not likely to hit fewer people than it should. So the other major ability is his special ability, which he will use throughout the fight. Even when you defeat him, he'll retain this ability. And this one is called Flanking Orders. So it's done every 25 or so seconds, and he'll basically spawn a row of ghost-like guardians that will slowly charge across the battlefield toward your raid. And if you stand in the guardians, you get cleaved and probably die. It's not necessarily true that you will, but you can only dodge through them between their hits, so you can kind of see their red animation as they're swinging. So the chances are very slim if you try to do it that way. That said, you can use things like blink to move through them, but you're not really actually walking through them, you're just bypassing them. So instead, since your raid has to remain stacked up for merciless attacks, it's a good idea to, again, have the tank communicate which direction the raid should move in order to avoid the flanking order wave that's coming in. It does spawn from a random location and sort of kind of go at a random angle toward the raid, so you'll have to adjust and watch for it. So you can see here it's to our right, and the shortest path to get out of the way is just slightly forward. So we all just move forward and wait for the next time. So that's Chang the Merciless. So let's go ahead and move on to our next Spirit King. Next up we have Subutai the Swift, and he's sort of a hunter mob. His first main ability is Volley, which he's using right there. And this is a series of 3 cone attacks targeted toward a random raid member. And this fixates on the location of the raid member targeted when he casts it. So that player can move and he'll still face in the same direction. However, the first attack, the first cone, is very wide, but does around 50,000 damage, pretty weak. The second cast is a slightly shorter width, but it does twice the damage, so 100,000. And then the third cast is an even smaller radius cone, but this one does 4 times the original damage, or 200,000. So if you see our Warlock there in the back, he was targeted by Volley, so he just started moving to the right to sidestep. The first hit usually hits the person because it's really wide, but then the follow-up 2, if they moved quickly, should miss completely. And that's basically how you handle it. It's very simple. So because of this, it's a good idea to have players spread out around the room if they're ranged or healers, and then they can easily be the only person that has to move if volley is on them. You kind of see the half circle of all of our ranged players in the back there. The second ability that, again, targets ranged preferably is Rain of Arrows. And this is, again, a radius, but this time it's a circle of about 12 to 15 yards around the target location. Anyone that gets caught in the rain is pinned to the ground by an arrow, and this arrow becomes attackable. Until you destroy the arrow, they're stunned. They can't really do anything. But you can use movement effects, such as blink, for example, to get out of it. But it's very similar to Bone Spike from Marrowgar in Icecrown Citadel, if you're used to that encounter. So essentially just attack, have your DPS, or ranged at least, kill the pinned arrow, and that player will be back to normal and do their thing. So the last effect is his special ability, which he'll use throughout the fight. And this is Pillage. So he's about to cast it in a moment here. And there it is. Yeah, cast on me, actually. So Pillage, he basically charges a random raid member. It can be melee or ranged. And he has a cast time where he'll spin, and once the cast completes, anyone within the radius of his Pillage attack will have their gear stolen, sort of. For 15 seconds with this debuff, your damage and healing are reduced by 50%, and you take 50% more damage as well. So, again, pretty simple. If you're spread out, it'll help you avoid it. But essentially, once you see it cast, just move out of the radius and you'll be fine. I should also mention that there's not footage in this video of it, but we recently tried to get the achievement on this, and it was bugged, but it's since been fixed. The achievement is actually involving this guy. So when he casts Pillage, everyone should stack up on the Pillage location, and if all 10 raid members get hit by Pillage, then you all have to simply /dance with the boss targeted, and you'll get the achievement instantly. So it's a very simple achievement, and the 50% debuff for 15 seconds is not anything really to worry about. So highly recommend you do that. If you just see the Pillage cooldown and there's nothing else coming up near it, just stack up your raid inside the Pillage, and then you can dance with him. All right, so that's Subutai. Let's move on to the next king. Next up, we have Ming the Demented. And this guy is really cool, but by far the most dangerous of the kings. So you can spend most of this phase stacked up, and you should do so. I'll tell you why later. But he essentially has 2 forms that he'll switch between. The first form is his crazed form, which he starts off in. And in this form, he attacks the tank, just like normal. But he does damage increased based on 200% of his current insanity value. So his insanity is an energy bar that goes from 0 to 100. It will increase automatically by 2 per second. So obviously at 50 insanity, he does 100% more damage to the tank. So just be aware of that. When he reaches 100 insanity, he will switch forms. So in this case, he's switching to Cowardice form. In Cowardice, he just runs around like a little baby in random directions. However, he also reflects damage back to your raid. The rate at which he reflects is half of the current insanity level in percentage. So if he's at 50 insanity, he will reflect 25% of damage dealt to him back to the players. This means that the damage taken from reflection obviously increases very, very quickly the higher his insanity gets. And the damage is done in the form of Cowardice debuff, which is sort of like an ignite or deep wounds mechanic on the player. It just rolls over with extra damage added onto it. However, it is a magic dispellable debuff, so your healers can dispel it, and they should do so. Priest Mass Dispel is very strong here, since you'll spend so much of the phase stacked up. Symbiosis Druid on a Priest for Mass Dispel. All that stuff is really strong. If you find that the damage output from the Cowardice phase is a little too high, one thing you can do is just simply have people attack less frequently, or not attack at all even. and you can just wait for him to get back to his crazed phase and then DPS him in that only. The last minor ability is Crazy Thoughts, which he casts fairly frequently. And this is an interruptible 2-second cast, but if you let it finish, he'll gain 10 insanity instantly. So this is one way you can keep him in one phase a little bit longer by interrupting it during that phase, and then let him finish it during the phase that you don't want him to be in. His last ability is his special ability that he uses throughout the fight after you're done fighting him. And this is basically a charm called Maddening Shout, which he's about to use in a moment here. So this charms everyone in the raid, and when it casts, everyone should be stacked up or move toward each other to be stacked. This will charm everybody and force you to deal 40,000 damage to everyone in the raid before they're broken from the charm. So that's why you stack up, just to easily do a bunch of AE right away and break everyone out. That said, there's also a dot that ticks while you're charmed, so the faster you do it, the better. But this, in combination with cowardice reflect damage, can be very scary. So this is a good time in which to use your raid cooldowns, healing cooldowns, all that stuff. So, yeah, that's Ming. He's pretty cool. Let's move on to the last. All right, finally we have Zane of the Endless Shadow. And he's not too difficult. Basically, he does shadow AE damage to random targets. It's pretty much his MO. So his first most common ability is Shadow Blast, which he's casting there. It's a 2-second cast on a random raid member, and it's interruptible. But it's so frequent that you need multiple people in a rotation if you want to interrupt them all. It doesn't do that much damage, but when it hits, it will do damage to anyone within 8 yards of the target. So it's generally a good idea for your ranged and healers to stay spread out on this guy. The second ability, which you cannot interrupt, but it's less frequent, is Charged Shadows. And this is sort of a chain effect, chain lightning type effect. Again, cast on a random raid member. But in this case, it will chain to all players within 8 yards of that target. And it does not seem to have a limit. So if you want, you can stack up on this phase and increase your healing output from AE heals, but you're going to take more damage from the AE shadow effects therein. So it's up to you how you want to do it. We found that spreading out was pretty much fine, so that's what I would suggest at any rate. His final ability is his special ability, again, the one he will retain throughout the rest of the fight, even when you're not fighting him, if he's not the last boss. And this is the Undying Shadows. So he casts this on a random raid member, prefers ranged, I believe, and when they get targeted, a small shadow orb will appear near them and chase them. And this orb can be attacked and killed at any time. When it dies, it leaves a pretty large shadow puddle that will deal damage to anyone that stands in it. So there you see the Undying Shadow orb chasing our druid there. And the puddle will just remain there for 30 seconds, at which point the orb will recoalesce or respawn from that location. And then you have to kill it a second time, at which point it's gone for good. So you basically have to deal with orbs for around 60 seconds each time they spawn. Other than that, it's pretty simple. So because the puddle obviously takes up space that you might want to use in the room, try to kite them toward the wall somewhere when they spawn, and then have your ranged DPS kill them off quickly, and then just watch for them to reappear and kill them a second time when you need to. So you can kind of see our priest is overlapping the previous orb. So that's just a way to minimize the space that they take up. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. That covers all of Zane's abilities. So this fight as a whole, obviously the order that you get the bosses determines which special abilities you have to deal with throughout the rest of the fight. So you might find that getting charmed for a long period of the fight is more difficult than others. But overall, it's not too bad. And just keep practicing each fight individually, or each phase individually, and then you can carry on through the rest of the fight pretty simply. So, good luck, and thanks for watching.